Chapter 1. The mud tore at her knees, slick with the copper stench of fresh blood and trampled earth. Iron gauntlets bruised Odelia's upper arms as two royal guards dragged her through the brutal chaos of the encampment. She did not fight them. Fighting meant a swift execution on the edge of a broadsword. Survival required absolute submission, a cold lesson the world had carved deeply into her bones. The command tent loomed ahead. It was an imposing pavilion of black canvas, snapping violently in the wind. Inside, the air was suffocating. It smelled of ozone, burnt flesh, and the undeniable tang of impending death. In the center of the room, upon a makeshift table of splintered wood, lay the Alpha King, Vance. He was a terrifying monument of a man, even while writhing in agony. Sweat slicked his bronzed skin. Black, jagged veins spider-webbed across his colossal chest, pulsing with a sickening rhythm, a shadow blade strike, the most lethal of dark magic weapons designed to rot a shifter from the inside out. "Fix him," a guard barked, shoving Odelia forward. She stumbled, falling hard to the dirt floor. Before she could gather her bearings, cold steel pressed flush against the frantic pulse at her throat. The captain of the guard stood over her, his eyes holding no mercy. "You are the healer they found hiding in the lower trenches. Draw the poison out, or you die before he does." Odelia swallowed hard, the sharp edge of the blade stinging her skin. She kept her gaze lowered, terrified of the oppressive aura radiating from the dying king. It was a crushing, leaden weight that demanded absolute surrender. Even delirious, his wolf commanded the room, pressing the oxygen from her lungs. With trembling fingers, she reached out. Her palms hovered over the deepest part of the blackened wound. She closed her eyes. She did not use herbs or bandages. Her gift was a dangerous, silent thing. She pushed her consciousness outward, sinking into the icy, necrotic grip of the shadow poison. Pull. The magic fought her, vicious and freezing, but she drew it upward. She felt the dark energy siphon from his torn flesh, transferring the lethal burden away from his heart. The freezing sludge of the dark magic slipped invisibly into her own pores, a secret burden she had carried her entire life. The black veins on his chest slowly began to recede, retreating from his vital organs. Suddenly, a hand clamped around her wrist. Odelia gasped. The grip was a shackle of blistering heat, burning through the icy dread that coated her skin. Vance jolted upward, his chest heaving. A guttural chest-rattling sound tore from his throat. It was not a cry of pain. It was a deeply possessive, bone-shaking growl of pure satisfaction. "Let go," she whispered, her voice failing her. She tried to pull back, but his hold only tightened, locking her bones in place. A strange, undeniable heat transferred through their connected skin. It raced up her arm, igniting a sudden, terrifying fire in her veins. Vance inhaled sharply, his broad chest expanding as he drew in the air around them. His wolf was howling beneath the surface, frantic and starving. Through the haze of his fever, the beast had caught it, the crisp scent of winter pine and crushed lavender. Her scent. He refused to let the source of that scent pull away. "Sire, release the wench," the captain urged, taking a hesitant step forward. Vance's head snapped toward the movement. His eyes flew open. They were no longer the clouded gaze of a dying man. They blazed a brilliant, predatory crimson. With a surge of terrifying strength, he yanked Odelia forward. She cried out, losing her balance, and crashed directly against the hard, burning expanse of his chest. His arm wrapped around her waist like a band of steel, locking her flush against him with an inescapable grip. The sword at her neck had been knocked away, but a new, infinitely more dangerous threat now held her captive. Vance bared his fangs at the surrounding soldiers. The low, thunderous snarl that vibrated through his chest shook the very foundation of the tent. "Whoever dares touch my mate," the Alpha King roared, his voice a lethal promise of slaughter, "I will grind his kingdom into dust." If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really motivates me to keep writing better stories for you. Chapter 2. The gilded cage of Obsidian Palace felt far colder than the blood-soaked trenches. Odelia paced the length of her luxurious confinement, her worn boots sinking into plush velvet carpets. Emerald silk tapestries cascaded from towering stone walls, yet the imposing grandeur only amplified her suffocating panic. She was trapped. Vance had refused to listen to reason. He had carried her from the battlefield himself, a colossal force of nature, ignoring his own healing wounds to ensure she could not flee. His command had been absolute, leaving no room for negotiation. Now his lingering scent saturated the opulent chamber, an intoxicating primal blend of winter storm and crushed cedar wood that made her treacherous pulse race. She fought the instinctual pull with everything she had. She had to remain cold. An impenetrable fortress of ice was her only defense against the searing heat of his claiming aura. Even from afar, he pushed his dominance through the thick oak door. It was a constant crushing pressure, demanding her surrender, wrapping around her senses like a physical caress. She clamped her hands over her ears, terrified of the lethal secret humming beneath her skin. If she surrendered to the intoxicating warmth of the Alpha King, she would destroy him. The heavy door groaned inward, shattering her fragile solitude. It was not the king who entered. Lady Morwenna glided into the room with the lethal grace of a viper. Draped in midnight satin, the cunning noblewoman surveyed Odelia with undisguised revulsion. Morwenna had long been favored by the council to claim the throne beside Vance, a calculated political alliance now seemingly thwarted by a trench healer. "Look at what the king dragged from the mud," Morwenna sneered. Her voice dripped with aristocratic venom. She circled Odelia slowly, her sharp gaze lingering on the dried blood and dirt still clinging to Odelia's ragged hem. "Do you truly believe a crown will fit upon the head of a nameless stray? You are nothing but a momentary distraction, a symptom of his fever. When his mind clears, he will discard you back to the dirt where you belong." Odelia kept her jaw locked. She welcomed the insult. Let them hate her. Let them drive her away. It would make her inevitable departure easier. Before Morwenna could unleash another verbal strike, Gamabram strolled into the tent's chamber. He leaned against the doorframe, flashing a charismatic, oblivious grin. Ladies, let us preserve the fine china," Bram chuckled, attempting to dispel the suffocating hostility. "Morwenna, try not to scare the new guest. We finally found a female who does not swoon at the king's shadow, and I would very much like to keep her." It was a catastrophic miscalculation. A terrifying snarl ripped through the corridor. Vance materialized behind his gamma, his eyes burning with possessive, unhinged fury. The lingering sting of the shadow blade and his mate's blatant rejection had stripped away his civilized veneer entirely. He lunged, his hand locked around Bram's throat, hoisting the formidable warrior entirely off the polished floor. "Speak of her again, son," Vance growled, his voice a fractured demonic rumble that vibrated in the floorboards, "and I will tear your tongue from your skull." Bram choked, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson as he clawed fruitlessly at his alpha's iron grip. Morwenna shrieked, backing into a corner as the king's feral rage consumed the room. It was the perfect distraction. Odelia did not hesitate. She slipped past the struggling men, blending into the frantic shadows of the corridor. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she sprinted through the labyrinthine stone halls. She navigated by pure survival instinct, darting past startled servants and ornate pillars. Her lungs burned with the effort, but freedom tasted like the crisp night air leaking through the grand archways. She reached the towering iron gates of the outer courtyard. The moonlight spilled across the cobblestones, illuminating a clear path to the dense, concealing forest beyond. She was almost free. A colossal shadow eclipsed the moon. Odelia slammed into a wall of unyielding muscle. A startled cry tore from her throat as she scrambled backward, but there was no escape. Vance loomed over her, a terrifying manifestation of half-shifted fury. Elongated canines gleamed in the pale light. His claws scraped against the stone masonry, trapping her completely between his powerful arms. He did not hurt her. Instead, he crowded her space, driven by an agonizing, desperate need that transcended logic. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her lavender and pine scent like a starving beast. The heat of his mouth burned against her shivering flesh, sparking a wicked fire in her blood. He found a jagged, faded scar resting just above her collarbone. His lips brushed the old wound, a searing, shockingly tender kiss that sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to her core. "Where?" Vance whispered against her trembling skin, his voice a gravelly, heartbroken demand. "Do you think you are taking my heart?" Chapter 3. The golden cage felt more like a tomb. Odelia stood before the ornate vanity mirror, her breathing shallow and erratic. She unlaced the velvet bodice of her borrowed gown with trembling fingers. The fabric slipped down her shoulders, pooling at her waist. She turned her back to the silvered glass, squeezing her eyes shut before forcing them open to face her grim reality. Jagged obsidian lines crawled up her spine. They were not mere bruises. They were crystalline fractures of pure dark magic, glittering with lethal intent beneath her pale skin. She was a sin-eater. When she pulled the shadow blade poison from Vance's chest, the darkness did not vanish. It merely relocated. The toxic sludge now thrived inside her, slowly turning her very blood into venom. A soft click echoed in the quiet chamber. Odelia gasped, clutching the silk to her chest as she spun around. Vance stood in the doorway. He had bypassed her locked door with terrifying silent ease. He wore no crown, no armor, just a loose linen shirt that revealed the healing expanse of his chest. His amber eyes burned with feral hunger, tracking the lavender scent that called to his wolf. Then his gaze dropped. He saw the fractured black crystal creeping up her bare back. The ambient temperature plummeted. The towering Alpha King froze, his predatory swagger evaporating into thin air. He crossed the expansive room in 3 long strides, his boot steps utterly silent. Odelia backed away, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Do not touch me, and nitch," she pleaded, her voice breaking. Vance did not listen. His calloused fingers brushed the obsidian cracks along her shoulder blade. The contact burned like dry ice, sending a sharp jolt of electricity straight to her core. He inhaled deeply, processing the necrotic taint laced beneath her sweet scent. Understanding crashed over him, brutal and crushing. "You took it," he whispered, his voice entirely wrecked. "The shadow poison. You absorbed it into your own soul." "I am a sin-eater," she confessed. Hot tears finally spilled down her cheeks, breaking through her icy facade. The iron walls she had built around her heart shattered completely. She wanted him. She craved the fierce, consuming protection of his wolf and the fiery heat of his touch. But fate was unspeakably cruel. "If you claim me, Vance, my blood will poison yours," she sobbed, backing flush against the cold stone wall. "A mating bite will transfer the darkness straight to your heart. It will kill you." The arrogant, untouchable monarch was gone. In his place stood a desperate, heartbroken man. Vance fell to his knees before her. He pressed his face against her stomach, his hands gripping her waist with a gentleness that defied his colossal strength. "I do not care," he murmured against her trembling skin, the vibration of his voice sending a wave of longing through her body. "I would gladly die 1,000 times before letting you carry this agony alone." Odelia wept openly, tangling her fingers in his dark hair. The soul-deep connection flared brilliantly between them, demanding to be sealed with a bite. But the intense emotional surge was a fatal miscalculation. A violent spike of agony ruptured her spine. Odelia shrieked. Pure, concentrated dark magic detonated from her core. A kinetic shockwave blasted outward, launching the Alpha King backward. He crashed through the solid stone wall with a deafening impact, completely engulfed in a blinding cloud of dust and debris. Odelia levitated inches above the floor, her body rigid, the whites of her eyes dissolved into pitch-black voids. The darkness had taken control. Chapter 4. The biting frost of the subterranean ice vault was a mercy. It numbed the venom burning through her veins. Isolation was the only true sanctuary for a walking plague. Odelia leaned her head against the frozen stone, exhaling a cloud of white mist. Her heartbeat fluttered, a dying bird trapped in a cage of ribs. The black crystal embedded in her spine pulsed with a dull, leaden ache. She had begged the guards to lock her away after the blast. It was the only way to protect the Alpha King from the monster she had become. Through the iron ventilation grate above her head, the muffled shouts of the Elder Council echoed down the winding stairwell. The ancient acoustics of Obsidian Palace carried every treacherous word. Lady Morwenna's voice sliced through the damp air like a poisoned blade. "She is a vessel of ruin, sire, a creature woven from dark magic. The explosion nearly collapsed the royal wing. You must execute her before the rot consumes our entire pack." A long, terrifying silence followed. Then a low, vibrating snarl shook dust from the ceiling. Vance's wolf was prowling the council room, furious and violently protective. His imposing aura bled through the floorboards, a fierce declaration of war against anyone who dared oppose him. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Gamma Bram interjected, his tone incredulous. "You think a frail healer locked in the lowest abyssal ice vaults is going to conquer the realm? She is practically freezing to death." A sudden, horrifying hush fell over the council. Bram had just broadcasted her exact location to a room full of political vipers. Down in the dark, the temperature in the cell plummeted further. It was not the ambient frost. It was the chilling scent of malice and drawn steel. The iron door groaned on its hinges. Morwenna stepped into the gloom, flanked by 3 elite assassins. Their faces were hidden behind silver masks. Odelia did not rise. She stayed seated on the frozen floor. Her lavender scent was entirely muted by the overwhelming stench of ozone and impending murder. She welcomed it. She truly did. If dying meant Vance would survive the dark magic, she would bare her throat willingly. She would accept the blade if it kept his crown and his heart safe. Morwenna sneered, stepping into the dim light. She lifted a wickedly curved silver spear. Its tip dripped with liquid nightshade, an agonizing toxin fatal to any shifter or magic wielder. "The king is blinded by a false, pathetic bond," the noblewoman hissed, her eyes gleaming with aristocratic triumph. "I am merely doing my civic duty to protect the throne." Morwenna lunged forward. The spear left her hand, flying with lethal precision straight for Odelia's chest. Odelia closed her eyes, waiting for the end, but the fatal blow never landed. A sudden, explosive scent of winter storm and crushed cedar eradicated the stench of poison in the vault. A colossal silhouette materialized from the impenetrable shadows, stepping directly into the weapon's path with terrifying speed. The sickening tear of flesh echoed in the cramped cell. Odelia's eyes snapped open in sheer horror. Vance stood over her, his broad shoulders shielding her completely, as he took the poisoned silver blade straight through his own back. Chapter 5. The silver spear tore through muscle and sinew with a sickening wet slide. Vance dropped to his knees. Blood, impossibly hot and metallic, sprayed across the frosted floor. Odelia screamed. It was not a human sound. It was a raw, fractured wail of a soul tearing in two. The sight of her towering alpha falling, bleeding out on the ice, shattered the last of her restraint. The dormant curse inside her spine resonated with her pure, unadulterated fury. Shadows detached from the frozen walls, whipping into a violent cyclone around her trembling form. A shockwave of pitch-black energy erupted directly from her core. The concussive blast obliterated the iron door completely. Morwenna and her masked assassins were hurled backward like broken dolls, crashing violently against the distant corridor walls with bone-snapping force. The ambient air pressure plummeted instantly. The sharp, toxic stench of nightshade and burning silver flooded the cramped cell. Moonlight, bleeding a deep, unnatural red through a high ventilation shaft, bathed the ruined dungeon in a crimson glow. Odelia scrambled frantically over the slick ice. She pulled his colossal frame into her lap, heedless of the freezing temperatures. His skin was turning rapidly cold. The nightshade poison raced through his veins, mingling lethally with the silver embedded in his back. "You foolish, beautiful king," she wept, pressing her hands desperately over his bleeding wound. "Why did you do that?" Vance coughed, a terrible wet sound, but his amber eyes burned with absolute feral clarity. He refused to die. His wolf refused to leave her alone in the dark. To save them both, he had to bind their souls unconditionally. Sharing his immortal life force was the only way to anchor her erupting magic and purge the lethal nightshade from his own failing system. With a sudden, terrifying burst of predatory strength, Vance flipped them over. He pinned her flush against the freezing ground. The ice beneath her spine was a brutal contrast to the blazing furnace of his chest, pressing down upon her. He snarled, baring his elongated canines. The sheer danger radiating from his imposing frame was entirely intoxicating. Odelia did not fight him. Every barrier of duty, rank, and fear incinerated in the searing heat of their proximity. Her blood hummed with a frantic, undeniable need. She surrendered completely to the primal instinct driving them both. She arched her neck, offering her racing pulse entirely voluntarily. Her hands mapped the broad expanse of his shoulders, uncaring of the hot blood staining her fingers. She tangled her grip in his dark hair, pulling him closer. "Claim me," she begged, her voice thick with unbridled desire. He buried his face in the crook of her neck. His nose brushed the shell of her ear, sending a wicked jolt of electricity straight to her core. He inhaled her lavender scent, now laced intimately with the metallic tang of his own blood. He licked the delicate skin over her pulse point, a slow, deliberate promise of possession that made her breath hitch. The unbearable romantic tension finally snapped. His fangs pierced her throat. Agony and euphoric pleasure collided in a blinding flash. A fierce, consuming heat rushed through her veins, rewriting her very destiny. But there was no gentle healing light to greet them. A violent explosion of pitch-black energy detonated directly from the bite mark. The abyssal force consumed them entirely, swallowing the crimson moonlight. The dungeon ceiling fractured above them, raining jagged stone and ice down upon their entangled bodies, burying them together in a terrifying, suffocating silence. Chapter 6. The crushing weight of the collapsed ceiling did not kill them. Silence stretched through the ruined ice vault. The suffocating, necrotic stench of the shadow poison vanished entirely. In its place, the pure, intoxicating aroma of winter pine and blooming lavender filled the fractured air. Odelia opened her eyes. The agonizing ache in her spine was gone. The obsidian crystals had melted away, purified by the blistering heat of the Alpha King's unyielding life force. The impossible had happened. The sacred claiming bond between a pure-blood Alpha and a Sin-Eater had sparked a miracle. It acted as an ultimate crucible, incinerating the dark magic into harmless ash. She gasped, filling her lungs with clean, icy air. Her vision possessed a newfound predatory sharpness. When she looked up, Vance was already watching her. His amber eyes widened in absolute reverence. "Your eyes," he breathed, his voice a gravelly caress. "They are pure silver." She was no longer a cursed vessel. She was a true Luna. Vance pushed the towering slabs of debris aside with effortless, colossal strength. He stood tall, his fatal wound perfectly healed. He reached down, pulling Odelia flush against his broad chest. His possessive grip promised a lifetime of fierce protection. Together, they stepped out of the subterranean ruins. The grand corridor above was in chaos. Lady Morwenna stood amidst her surviving assassins, her triumphant smirk dissolving into sheer, unadulterated terror. She took a trembling step backward. Vance did not hesitate. His wolf unleashed a dominant, terrifying roar that shattered the remaining stained glass windows. He did not even need to shift. A suffocating wave of pure alpha command radiated from his imposing frame. The invisible force drove the assassins to their knees, pinning them helplessly to the stone floor. Morwenna shrieked, collapsing under the unbearable pressure. Her wicked rebellion was extinguished in mere seconds, defeated by a king defending his mate. Odelia leaned into Vance's side. A profound, beautiful peace settled over her racing heart. She had stopped running. She realized that facing the darkness, anchored by an all-consuming love, held the power to break the most sinister curses. Gamma Bram emerged from the sprawling crowd of royal guards. His face was bruised, but it split into a brilliant, triumphant grin. He raised his sword high. Vance swept Odelia into his arms. He carried her effortlessly up the sweeping staircase, marching directly into the grand throne room. He did not set her down. He claimed the towering obsidian throne, settling her firmly in his lap for the entire kingdom to see. "Hail the king!" Bram roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall. "And hail our Luna!" One by one, the elite warriors and terrified nobles dropped to their knees. The rhythmic thud of armor hitting the stone floor sounded like a giant heartbeat. They bowed their heads in absolute reverence, chanting the name of their magnificent new queen. epilogue. The heavy oak doors of the royal bedchambers clicked shut, sealing them in absolute profound silence. The roaring cheers of the pack faded into a distant, muffled hum. Vance did not set her down. He carried Odelia across the cavernous room, his powerful strides eating up the distance to the colossal four-poster bed. The fire in the hearth cast flickering golden shadows across his sharp jawline. He was a terrifying, imposing monarch to the outside world, but here, in the dim light, his amber eyes held nothing but raw, undisguised reverence. He lowered her onto the plush velvet mattress with agonizing care. It was as if he feared she might shatter. "I am not made of glass, Vance," Odelia whispered. Her voice was raspy, still adjusting to the absence of the dark magic that had choked her throat for years. He knelt beside the bed. His towering frame dwarfed the ornate furniture. He stripped off his ruined, blood-stained tunic, casting it aside. The firelight danced over the intricate network of silvery scars marring his broad chest. "You are more precious than glass," he murmured, his voice a deep, vibrating rumble. "You are my Luna, my savior, my very soul." His calloused fingers reached out, hovering just inches from her throat. The claiming mark rested there, a crescent of bruised, healing skin where his fangs had pierced her. It pulsed with a warm, steady rhythm, tethering their life forces together. Odelia leaned into his touch. She closed her eyes, savoring the intoxicating friction of his skin against hers. The scent of winter pine and crisp mountain air saturated her senses, entirely overwhelming the lingering memory of ash and shadow poison. "It does not hurt," she promised softly. She tangled her fingers in his thick, dark hair. "It feels right." Vance exhaled a shuddering breath. The sound was ragged, torn from the deepest part of his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck. His nose brushed the delicate curve of her collarbone, inhaling her lavender scent as if it were the only oxygen left in the world. "I thought I had lost you," he confessed. The vulnerability in his tone was devastating. "When the ice vault collapsed, my heart stopped beating. I felt the darkness consume you." "The darkness is gone," Odelia soothed. She stroked the tense line of his shoulders, feeling the coiled muscles slowly relax beneath her touch. "Your fire burned it away. We survived, Vance." He lifted his head. His eyes blazed with a fierce, possessive hunger that made her pulse jump. The romantic tension in the room thickened, transforming the quiet aftercare into something infinitely more dangerous. He shifted his weight, pressing her gently back into the pillows. His large hands bracketed her waist, his thumbs tracing the bare skin where her torn bodice had slipped away. The blistering heat of his touch sent a wicked, undeniable jolt of electricity straight to her core. "I intend to spend the rest of my immortal life worshipping you," Vance growled, his lips brushing against hers. It was a searing, deliberate promise of absolute devotion. "Starting right now, if you believe love like this is worth the pain, subscribe for more stories that will break your heart and heal it at the same time. If you believe love like this is worth the pain, subscribe for more stories that will break your heart and heal it at the same time."